I realized that nobody had taken it seriously enough to write a BIP to introduce post-quantum cryptography to Bitcoin. BIP 360 isn't perfect, but it's designed to solve the problem. So ideally, we get ahead of this before there is an emergency.
Permissionless, the crypto industry's leading developer conference, is coming to Brooklyn this June 24th to the 26th. And this time, Bitcoin is showing up in a big way. That's right. With confidence in Ethereum and Solana on the decline, interest in Bitcoin development is riding high. And yet the way forward for many builders remains unclear. Layer 2s, meta protocols, soft fork upgrades. We'll be talking about the future of Bitcoin and how and if it needs to change. Of course, tickets are going fast. You can get them today at blockworks.co. We'll see you there. Hey everybody, this episode of Supply Shock is powered by Core. You're going to hear a lot more about them later in this episode, but first, a word from our sponsors.
Hold Bitcoin and earn yield. Staking Bitcoin with Core, the leading Bitcoin scaling solution, earns real yield while keeping your Bitcoin right where it is. No lending, no bridging, no wrapped assets. Just lock your Bitcoin using Bitcoin native time locks, help secure the Core network, and earn liquid Core tokens. Your Bitcoin never leaves your wallet. Still your keys, still your coins, now your yield. Ready to put your BTC to work and earn max yields? Start staking at stake.coredao.org/blockworks.
Hey everybody, Pete Rizzo, the Bitcoin historian on X. On today's episode of Supply Shock, we're bringing on a Bitcoin developer who is tackling one of the most intriguing new threats to Bitcoin. We're talking about the rise of quantum computing, new powerful form of computer that can potentially break the cryptographic algorithms that secure Bitcoin public keys, of course, foundational to every hodler out there. While there's certainly sensationalism around the subject, it's one that our developer here, Hunter Beast, is taking seriously. That's why he's authored BIP 360. It proposes a new output type called pay to quantum resistant hash, or P2QRH, which makes it harder for quantum computers to break these algorithms. So to talk all about this, we have our special guest today, Hunter Beast, senior protocol engineer for the Enduro sidechain platform. Welcome to the podcast, Hunter.
Hi.
Well, excited to have you here. I know we were chatting backstage a little bit about your background, but let's get into the meat of it here. When did you start thinking about the quantum threat to Bitcoin seriously? And how did you start working on this project?
So I started thinking about this and writing about it and researching it about a year ago. It's coming onto about a year. I then founded a nonprofit called Surmount Systems to kind of help finance that effort and just kind of center development around it.
Well, what was the thing that you saw where you said, "Oh my God, I got to take this seriously"? Because people have talked around the subject. Obviously, we'll get into specifics like Jameson Lopp's kind of blog and some of the literature on the subject, a little bit. But like, what was your moment where you said, "Oh, I've got to take this," or somebody's got to take this seriously? It might as well be me.
What happened was I knew that Taproot was vulnerable to quantum computers, and I was researching who had written about this and addressed it in a serious way, because Peter Willa, one of the kind of like core devs who
Yeah, legendary core dev, and author of a number of Bitcoin improvement proposals, including a couple major soft forks.
and also he kind of spearheaded development of libsec P256K1, which is the library that powers the elliptic curve behind Bitcoin. So he would know, or at least should be relatively aware of the potential weaknesses of ECDLP ECDLP being the problem, the discrete log problem that secures elliptic curve cryptography. And I was looking at the Bitcoin BIPs. I was looking at the Bitcoin Devs mailing list, which had recently moved to Google Groups or Google whatever it is. And
Thanks to Brian Bishop for that great Herculean effort. Always
Mhm.
goes unthanked. We like to thank him.
Yeah, Conser is a great guy too. So
Yeah.
good go work in that part. And yeah, I was just looking around, and it hadn't really been spoken about. And even in the old mailing list, it was most of the activity around it was in 2020, when Taproot was still being evaluated and developed, and the soft fork sort of being made available to clients and that sort of thing. As I was doing that research, I realized that nobody had taken it seriously enough to write a bit to introduce post-quantum cryptography to Bitcoin. And like there was like some research, but it wasn't a lot. Um, at least not as much as there is now. It's definitely improved.
Maybe we can pause there and talk about this kind of post quantum cryptography versus the cryptography that's currently there. So obviously, Satoshi Nakamoto put out Bitcoin in 2009. Did it in a couple of years, kind of stitched together the protocol, kind of grabbing a number of publicly available prior inventions. Some of this are these cryptographic libraries that you're talking about. What's the difference? Why are these older kind of class of cryptographic protocols different from this newer quantum resistant class? What's the difference between those?
Yeah, so technically post-quantum cryptography is older now than elliptic curve cryptography was back when uh, Satoshi started Bitcoin. In particular, Sphinx, maybe not in the current its present form, but like Sphinx Plus 3.1. But like originally, Sphinx came out around 2015, and that was written by Daniel J. Bernstein, who is a famous cryptographer and many other circles. He's known for coming up with ED 25509, which is a different curve that um, secures like Monero and other
These are
projects
the
like that.
curves that, just for people who are listening who are familiar, your private key exists on this kind of infinite curve of potential
Your
private
public key,
key.
your public key
Public,
to
sorry, yeah, right. It exists on this kind of infinite curve, and when you're creating a new Bitcoin wallet, essentially you're assigned one of these keys, but there are quintillions or some kind of infinitesimal amount of keys.
yeah, it's not technically infinite, right? Like it fits in 256 bits, but 256 bits is an enormous number. So it's near infinite,
Right, 'cause this
maybe.
is the scary part when people hear about, okay, Bitcoin isn't quantum resistant, my funds might be saved. Yesterday, we saw somebody kind of take an old, Bitcoin that they mined in 2010 when the price was under 10 cents, and they moved it to a new wallet address. And one of the comments I got on that post was, oh, might be someone moving to multi-sig to take this quantum threat seriously. So maybe back to the protocol differential here. So what is the difference between these two like classes of protocols exactly?
Yeah, well, so essentially, post-quantum cryptography comes up with problems that we believe, and these are just like researchers. They have a sense for, in theory, that these class of cryptographic problems can be more difficult for a quantum computer to compromise than elliptic curve cryptography. And so, essentially, post-quantum cryptography is quantum resistant. It's not necessarily like 100% secure against quantum computers. For that to happen, you likely actually need a quantum computer to secure against quantum computers. But with classical cryptography, we can get pretty far, hopefully.
But is
There's
there
still
like
some
some elemental difference? Like what, like, for a layperson like myself, like is there like an actual, like, what's the new advance like with the quantum resistant cryptography that wasn't present before?
Yeah, so elliptic curve cryptography is based on elliptic curves, whereas post-quantum cryptography is based on a few different approaches, not just one. One of those is hash-based algorithms. So hashes are considered to be quantum resistant uh, against at least Shor's algorithm, which is the easier algorithm to run. And
So hash is like what's created when miners are solving blocks. They're just spitting out hashes. So that will be unaffected by a quantum computer.
it will likely be unaffected by a quantum computer for a long time. And if it ever is, then the most people could do would be like to compromise HTLCs in the Lightning Network, or of course mining. And so proof of work, but the thing with proof of work is that there's a difficulty adjustment. So the minute that somebody starts running quantum computers to augment or supplement mining, then people will just start to miners will likely adopt that technology just as they did with ASIC
Right,
technology.
ASICs and yeah, right. But is there? I guess maybe, and maybe there isn't an answer here that will satisfy me. But like, in terms of like, when you think about, mining with a laptop to an ASIC, right? Okay, like the difference here is that with a laptop, laptops are built to run a number of functions. The ASIC chip was purpose designed, right? It was a chip entirely designed for mining the Bitcoin algorithm with these quantum computing protocols, right? So we're saying these elliptic curve, cryptographic protocols, they have some limitation or weakness as compared to this new class of protocols. So, what is the limitation or weakness exactly?
Yeah, so they essentially depend on the fact that it's very difficult to factor large numbers and like to find the original numbers used to create a larger number. Shor's algorithm is something that can be run on a quantum computer that can essentially take a public key and find the original numbers that went into making it.
So this is essentially the big thread that we're talking about, this reverse engineering. We'll get into it with talking about Jameson Lobb's blog post, which I think does a good job of kind of talking this theory here. But it's so essentially you're saying that it's just less likely that with this new set of algorithms, they just apply really well to this one specific problem of quantum computers can potentially break these older algorithms. I guess how do we know that exactly?
Well, you can run Shor's algorithm on smaller numbers, and it seems to do okay. Uh, the thing that you really want to see, though, is quantum parallelism, and also before that, the quantum computer has to be good enough to store the entire key. But you can store like an abbreviated key. You can essentially dial down the difficulty for a quantum computer just to test it out, and that's something we've actually done at Surmount Systems just for 8-bit numbers, which is a far cry from a 256-bit number. It ran on one of IBM's quantum chips on their quantum as a service cloud, and it took about 3 minutes to run. And yes, it did produce the correct result.
Earn real yield on your Bitcoin by simply holding it. Trustless Bitcoin staking with Core means no lending, no bridging, no wrapping, no swapping, no new trust assumptions. Simply lock up your Bitcoin on the Bitcoin blockchain, help elect validators to secure Core, and earn your share of Core token rewards. This isn't a promise or point system. This is real, liquid, and live yield, fueled by activity on the largest Bitcoin DeFi platform. And to earn even more, multiply your rewards tenfold by dual staking Bitcoin and Core tokens, meaning your Core token rewards become the key to unlocking even greater yield. Start earning Core and put just 1% of your BTC to work. Start staking at stake.coredao.org/blockworks. For the past decade, Ledger has been the global leader in digital asset security, trusted to secure more than 20% of the world's crypto assets. Celebrating 10 years of innovation, Ledger is making digital ownership more secure and accessible with their latest products, Ledger Stacks and Ledger Flex. These wallets feature the world's first secure touchscreens, simplifying your digital transactions while ensuring uncompromising security through Ledger's secure chip and proprietary OS. Plus, with the Ledger Security Key app, you can say goodbye to traditional passwords and step up your digital protection. Ready to protect your assets? Choose the most trusted name in hardware wallets, Ledger, and take control of your digital security today at ledger.com.
So you were able to find the key like using that computer, or this was just a test kind of experiment to see if something like that was possible.
Well, it would find the 8-bit key.
Oh, okay, right, okay. So it is so an 8-bit key. So that's the current state of the art. And I know there's a lot of debate around how fast the technology will progress. But I maybe getting back to the BIP authorship here, kind of as the primary focal points. You have BIP 360. And so now the primary advance here is you're taking some of these new algorithms and you're just applying it to the address format, right? You're sort of suggesting that if and when quantum computing, arrives, the network would move towards a new address, and people storing bitcoins in these addresses, they would just be more secure against, essentially this quantum computers kind of finding these numbers and reverse engineering the keys to Bitcoin.
Yeah, and so the BIP 360 in particular introduces a new output type, also known as an address type, that essentially combines multiple types of post-quantum cryptography signature algorithms, and it allows you to create multiple public keys and commit to them in a single address, which is just a hash of the hashes of those public keys. Your wallet will need to keep track of all this information, and I've been developing a library in that could be a step more advanced than the original Bitcoin Core client with their wallet.dat files. Ideally, the keys can be generated from the same seed, but there is a limitation in BIP32 compatibility. BIP32 is the hierarchical deterministic wallet.
That's how you get the words that represent your seed phrase. Yeah.
Actually, the words is a separate BIP. It's BIP39. That's
Oh, okay. Right. Okay.
yeah, but the mnemonic seed phrase. But the BIP32 HD wallet uses that seed entropy to then derive multiple
A
public
number of
keys,
addresses. Right. Yeah.
4 addresses, and so uh, ideally we can maintain that functionality in the very least with BIP360. The one or BIP360 compatible wallets. The one limitation, however, are XPubs. Uh, it's not quite clear yet how we would come up with new public keys um, for each of these algorithms in a from an existing public key. Because like with elliptic curve cryptography, you can do EC math. You can add some numbers to the curve and just kind of uh, find a new public key that corresponds to a private key. That doesn't seem to translate well either to hash-based cryptography, to my knowledge, or to lattice-based cryptography. And lattice-based is another type of post-quantum cryptography.
So maybe before we get too far away from here, so quantum computers are a threat. They're a threat specifically to people's seed phrases. They can discover these seed phrases. If that technology comes to pass, you're saying that some of the other foundational technologies that we use to secure Bitcoin will be threatened. So in this case, BIP32, which essentially allows you to kind of generate a number of addresses from the private key. And so, why propose this as a BIP as rather than just a research, right? Because if I think about the Bitcoin development process, a Bitcoin improvement proposal or BIP, is generally kind of treated as like a pretty serious kind of thing, right? You're suggesting to the network that this kind of migration happen. Obviously, we understand the threat vectors and we've established that, but why propose this as a specific BIP rather than just research that you would publish?
Well, there's already been research done into this. What we need is something a bit more actionable and a bit more concrete to discuss, right? Like how we would actually plan to address this in a way that is serious enough that we would have a BIP waiting in the wings, in addition to all the libraries needed, and also an implementation in Bitcoin Core, a pull request, and an activation client, right? Like ideally, we have all these things available so that we are able to act quickly if a quantum threat becomes more serious.
Well, I guess the other way to ask that question is, how do you know that your approach is the best approach? You're saying maybe it isn't, but this is the best that you can think of today, and you're trying to start the conversation there.
That's exactly a great way to put it. The BIP360 isn't perfect, but it's designed to solve the problem in a way that uh, sort of balances a number of different engineering constraints, including the size of the signatures and public keys that are much larger in post-quantum cryptography. And so, in order to satisfy that engineering constraint, we created a new field in the transaction, similar to how SegWit created a new field. We're we're calling this instead of the witness. There's also going to be a attestation, and in this attestation, it will have potentially a discount that could be greater than what SegWit introduced. the reason it's a new field instead of like say increasing the witness discount is because the witness isn't what they call like the best term we have for this is just the witness isn't JPEG resistant. Whereas the attestation has a much stricter rule set requiring only valid public key and signature pairs to be included in the transaction, and they have to validate for them to receive that discount, like a greater discount.
Maybe a practical question. So, okay, this is the best advance, if this happens. We're talking about hypothetical scenarios. To the person who's maybe moving their 50 Bitcoin from 2010, are there people who are more or less vulnerable? And I guess I'll introduce the idea. One of the reasons we kind of moved to multi-sig or multi-signature wallets is this idea, that you would have multiple private keys that secure your Bitcoin. In some cases, like myself, I'm a user of Casa, so I'm able to kind of use the 2 of 3 and 3 of 5 kind of wallet combination to secure, my Bitcoin. Is that more or less, resistant to these things? Is that a better thing to do, right? So maybe if this proposal doesn't move forward, are there classes of users on Bitcoin who are, more or less affected by some situation like this?
Yeah. So if you were using, say, a Taproot multisig, that would be pretty bad because Taproot encodes a public key in the address itself. Also, even if you had multiple keys behind a Taproot wallet, it would only look like one to a quantum computer, which could then just derive the key for that
Could
and
you explain
spend
that?
from
Why would that only look like one?
well, because it's just one public key in the pay to taproot address format. So even if you're using something like Music 2 or Frost or Roast or whatever to uh, sort of interactively uh, create amongst a number of different shares, uh, a like you still need a single key to commit to once you have that multi-sig. Similar to how uh, when you have in an older multi-sig format like pay-to-witness script hash, which starts with BC1Q rather than Taproot, which starts with BC1P. For pay-to-witness script hash, you're just paying to a hash of the multi-sig script that was initially created by the descriptor for that multi-sig wallet, right? And so that's just a hash of the script, and you pay to that as the address when you receive funds to it. So a pay-to-witness script hash multisig would definitely be a lot harder for a quantum computer to attack via a long exposure attack and even also a short exposure attack, because it also has to sort of calculate the multiple keys that go into it. And so there's going to be lower hanging fruit elsewhere on the blockchain, including Satoshi's coins and pay to public key addresses and also reused addresses. Oftentimes, these like exchange cold wallets are reused, as like Binance and Kraken and cold
So maybe just to
technology.
like kind of get the threat to everyone, it's so if this happens, like even if I have my seed phrase stamped on a piece of metal and it's buried in the backyard and it's 2 feet deep in the ground, the quantum computer is still going to be able to identify that private key, even if there's no
It's a bit more nuanced than that. So like a quantum computer probably isn't going to be able to get your seed phrase ever.
but it'll figure out the private key.
Right. It'll be able to figure out the private key for a specific address, so long as it has the public key for that. And so public key is revealed whenever you spend your coins. And so uh, whenever you sign a transaction and publish it to the mempool, that is kind of problematic. So you might want to take it to a private mempool like Slipstream, and that would help maybe, except then there's also the problem of block reorg attacks where like um, a a block would maybe be mined, but then other miners will build on a different block, and so you'll have your public keys exposed on the other block, but it won't actually be part of the chain, it won't actually be mined, and like the chain with the most work. And so the problem So the way you solve that problem is with a multisig. It's not a great solution. It's not like a perfect solution. But if you're using like a 13, a 15 to secure a bridge, right? That's definitely more resistant to quantum computers than an address that, like a single sig.
All right. So are you talking to different ecosystem stakeholders about this? And I'm curious, who's been more receptive, right? Are there, there's a lot of players in the space, right? There's software wallet providers, there's hardware wallet providers, there's kind of the seed metal backup, there's the multi-sig kind of, collaborative custody players. Are they aware of this issue? And if so, like, are they advising clients to do things about it? Like, what is the state of their conversation in comparison to what you've put forward in BIP 360?
Well, so there's a couple camps. So one is wallet devs, and they generally are pretty receptive to this concern. The problem is there's a number of new Taproot wallets out there. That's not good with regards to quantum computing. And also, there are like the bridge operators, the L2s, right? Anything that uses BitVM is also dependent on Taproot. So it's actually, ironically, the older technologies in that have other like liquid federated bridges, that kind of thing, or maybe rootstock.
So why then do you mention that Satoshi's coins? Obviously that's the big kind of idea here that maybe the Satoshi's coins would be able to be vulnerable. They're kind of from the older class, right? I imagine Satoshi. Well, we know that Satoshi hasn't moved the coins, since they were mined. If he does in fact own the coins in those addresses, but so what is the vulnerability to Satoshi in particular, or is it just the attraction that you could hack Satoshi?
Well, yeah, all of Satoshi's coins were mined to public keys. Those aren't necessarily any more or less secure than even Taproot addresses. So they're about the same amount of s- quantum insecurity. The difference between Taproot is that came out a lot later. So the balances in Taproot addresses are often much smaller than those in Satoshi's coins, which are an average of 50 Bitcoin each. So one strategy would be to never have a Lightning channel that's bigger than 50 Bitcoin, or never have a wallet that has more than 50 Bitcoin in it, so that you can kind of take advantage of Satoshi's coins, creating a crypto economic incentive to take those coins instead of yours during a potential Q date crisis where there's a need for transitioning these coins to new address types.
Yeah, I want to kind of segue over to the Q-Day crisis and this idea of, kind of this, idea that there essentially could be an emergency, right? And this is something that I think, we really haven't seen in Bitcoin too frequently, right? In 2014, I remember there being an example of there being an issue with the SSL library where there was sort of an emergency kind of, push for a Bitcoin patch to be kind of put through in 24 to 48 hours. But, we really in modern Bitcoin, there's a lot of people who have gone years and years and years, and Bitcoin really hasn't handled anything like what you're talking about. But you're really saying that if there is a quantum computer that is created, you're suggesting that maybe this kind of upgrade process would need to be pushed into a couple weeks or even days.
That would be hard because generally soft fork activation takes months, uh, and it takes like 90% consensus. If it's a botched soft fork, then you have a fork in the chain, and
Multiple currencies, yeah.
yeah, so it's really bad. So ideally, we get ahead of this before there is an emergency. We could do this in a way that is copacetic to the general Bitcoin development process that we've seen so far, which includes like a 6 month activation period with I mean, and even then is like some people call that a speedy trial, and so it's like that's even that is controversial. I
Well, I'm going to
remember.
read a quote from Peter Woolley here. He says he's talking about kind of what to do in the situation, right? He says the alternative, to Q-Day scenario is that if millions of Bitcoin become vulnerable to threat, I cannot see how the currency can maintain any value at all in such a setting. This affects everyone, even those who have diligently moved their coins to PKE QC protected schemes. So you would agree with that level of it's that level of an emergency.
It would be. However, there are some things we can do to mitigate against all the incoming liquidity as well. There's a proposal that I'm working on with some colleagues, and we it's finished. We just haven't. We still need to publish it, but the idea is that you restrict the number of Satoshi coin style inputs uh, being included in a block to one, to just one per block. And that proposal is called Hourglass. And that spreads out the 34,000 pay to public key coin or transactions, let's say that, spreads those out into over the course of a year, essentially, instead of uh, that a number of transactions could actually be included probably within an hour or two worth of blocks, depending on a few factors. But um, it's not. It doesn't require a lot to move that many coins, especially if you're willing to outbid everyone.
Well, so there's the practicality here, and then there's the theory, right? I think one of the things I like about Jameson Lopp's piece, you can go to lop.net and see him kind of talking about his stance on the quantum computing issue is essentially that Bitcoin developers are sort of seen as stakeholders with some, they are users of Bitcoin, but they have some special kind of privileges or considerations, right? That they think of, and one of the reasons that Bitcoin development is, I think, broken from the cryptocurrency development group is there is this kind of idea that Bitcoin should provide the highest property rights that it can, right? And I think there's a lot of kind of the derivative literature, sort of in popular Bitcoin culture, is this idea that Bitcoin, you'll always have it. The software will be around for hundreds of thousands of years. You're hearing people in the White House kind of openly talk about it, use that language. But there's this idea that developers really, really do have, I guess the choice of users to run certain software can have implications for things like a wealth distribution, right? We see this with hard forks and other alternative cryptocurrencies in which, things like that have happened. Where do you fall in on this idea? Of course, we're talking about kind of quantum recovery, right? The idea that developers might, in this situation, maybe not just propose kind of a BIP like you're talking about with 360, switching to the new addresses, or something like the Hourglass proposal, where there's kind of maybe something put in place to mitigate withdrawals, but actually kind of an active effort from developers to safeguard coins that might be at risk. What are your thoughts on that just general concept?
One of the big problems with Jameson's proposal to uh, burn the Satoshi's coins is that it essentially alters Bitcoin's monetary properties. It is essentially changing the supply to something a little smaller, but it kind of breaks the original contract with any users with Bitcoin, and that like we're supposed to have hard sound money, but we're not supposed to have like non-inflatable money, at least not until the year 2140. And we're not also expected to have like ultrasound money like the ETH crowd is. Like they're worshiping this whole burning stuff and expecting it to be number go up technology, and it turns out that's not necessarily why people
Yeah,
choose
it
to
doesn't seem like
invest in
that
the
works.
coin. It actually, in some ways, like Eric Yakes, for example, puts out there the seventh property of money is immutability or mutable monetary policy, right? Like if you have a mutable monetary policy like what the Federal Reserve does, that essentially reduces confidence. And whereas like if we're altering Bitcoin's monetary properties to become more scarce, maybe that does help the price and also an extension its security. But in some ways, it also breaks the original contract.
You can now earn real yield on your Bitcoin by simply holding it. The core blockchain, Bitcoin's leading scaling solution, rewards you for keeping your Bitcoin right where it is. Here's how it works. Core is secured by a group of validators. When you lock up your BTC using Bitcoin's native time lock, you help elect validators to secure the core network. In return, your validator earns rewards and passes them back to you. While time locked, your Bitcoin never leaves your wallets. No bridging, no lending, no counterparties. When the time lock expires, you get it back, completely untouched. Still your keys, still your coins, now your yield. Want to earn even more? Lock up core tokens along with your BTC to unlock higher yields through dual staking. Learn more and get started at stake.coredao.org/blockworks. For the past decade, Ledger has been the global leader in digital asset security, trusted to secure more than 20% of the world's crypto assets. Celebrating 10 years of innovation, Ledger is making digital ownership more secure and accessible with their latest products, Ledger Stacks and Ledger Flex. These wallets feature the world's first secure touchscreens, simplifying your digital transactions while ensuring uncompromising security through Ledger's secure chip and proprietary OS. Plus, with the Ledger Security Key app, you can say goodbye to traditional passwords and step up your digital protection. Ready to protect your assets? Choose the most trusted name in hardware wallets, Ledger, and take control of your digital security today at ledger.com.
So Jameson's proposal is that the substitution coins would be actually kind of taken out of the supply. You're saying that breaks the social contract because essentially 21 million is the limit, but we're expecting 21 million, and anything that sort of reduces that, even hypothetically, is to use something that amounts to kind of a break in the social contract.
Correct.
So in terms of, so it sounds like you don't like that idea in terms of how you would distribute the funds in that case. So maybe go through my notes here in terms of kind of looking at some of Jameson's estimates. He's also sort of estimating that, in his view, only 25% of the Bitcoin supply is vulnerable to a quantum attack. It sounds like you think it might be more based on maybe some of the things that you're saying about different wallet addresses.
No, I think 25% is a reasonably accurate figure. That's still something like 4 or 5 million coins, right?
Mm. Yeah, I think that would be about that. Yeah. So in this kind of scenario, so it sounds like what you're saying is you put a paramount on the money supply, but going back to sort of this wealth distribution idea. So let's just say you get to the scenario, and people start losing their coins. You don't. So it sounds like you don't support then there being. You don't like kind of freezing Satoshi's coins. I guess how then do you secure Bitcoin's property rights in a scenario where wallets are sort of being broken into? Or do you subscribe to the theory that this is sort of fair game? It's that this is the state of the art of the technology, and the protocol would be, essentially. I guess you get into like you mentioned the Ethereum crowd, this idea that code is law, right? So that whatever I have my Bitcoin in an address and secured in a certain way. And with the case of the Ethereum protocol, there was an incident where there was this protocol called the DAO. People put in money to this smart contract, hoping the smart contract would invest. Smart contract was hacked, and there was a lot of people who supported the hacker, basically saying that he was following the contract, the actual code according to how it was written. A lot of people didn't like that. And so where do you fall on this idea that the kind of code as it exists, that is the determiner of what kind of rights you have to the system? And someone who finds, an ingenious way to exploit that is maybe no different from someone who, comes up with the next new system. I will just give an example, right? The BitAxe miner. This is a kind of a new innovation, right? This is the idea that you can run a kind of small mining unit that competes for block rewards. These $200 machines are winning blocks, and they're not going to data centers, right? So this is kind of the product of human ingenuity, that somebody found a new way to kind of get access to something within the Bitcoin system. Where do you stand on this idea of, not only code is law, but this idea that, Bitcoin as a system can be sometimes, I guess I don't want to use the exploited, but certain actors can use it to their advantage, and maybe they have a right to using it to their advantage if they are able to get kind of find something that's smart enough.
I think all this comes down to key management. It's kind of the same problem in that if you aren't taking steps to make sure that you are the only person with your private keys, then you're essentially putting yourself in harm's way. And all quantum computing does is once it gets good enough to pose a threat, is it makes it so that when you expose your public key, you are in danger. And so the solution to this, um, aside from using older address formats like pay to witness script hash and pay to witness public key hash, which are both, they both start with BCO and Q, and those are good. you would need to introduce post-quantum cryptography, and that's what BIP360 solves. And there will need to be a transition period for people to safeguard their coins and be uh, good custodians of their own wealth. And like you need to be proactive, as any Bitcoiner should, about their own security. Multi-sig, is a great way to be proactive in that regard.
But there's this idea that you should have a reasonable expectation that Bitcoin will work, right? You mentioned like kind of the seventh property. People who are holding their own keys, they think that right now they have sort of an inalienable right to this kind of key set. I guess, do you think should end Bitcoin users have that perception, or do you think that is like kind of a faulty perception or a dangerous perception based on your work?
The problem is, if elliptic curve cryptography is compromised, it doesn't matter necessarily that principle or that value, because it's an actual threat, right? Like it would be, at least in this scenario. And so it it really is like just a matter of also being practical about the situation.
Yeah, because I think about like theoretically, like what would be lost in the scenario, right? So we mentioned, talking about the Bitcoin and kind of crypto split over the years, right? And there's this idea that Bitcoin has certain properties; those properties are differentiated from other cryptocurrencies, and there's this idea again that you have the right to your keys, and that nobody, no even developer team can come between you and those keys. But in a scenario where, so this is again like hypothetical, let's just say there is a Q-day scenario. Let's just say maybe Satoshi's keys are being kind of taken by some sort of hostile actor. Maybe some people who secured their Bitcoin according to the protocol rules at that time, have experienced some sort of loss. Like what's lost in that scenario from you, if there has to be some sort of because again, I understand you're trying to prevent the scenario, but I think from a purely theoretical a standpoint, I'll give you an example. This is a bit of a tangent. Something that I think a lot about is, the block size wars, right? There was this period in Bitcoin's history where sort of two proposals for the path forward, were put forward. And, one of them is now treated as kind of the right way to do things. This was the small blockers were right. They had the correct, technical framework. And the sort of the other side of this, equation was kind of thrown out. It was viewed as kind of like a negative thing that shouldn't have ever been thought about. But I think a lot about to what extent we've just post-rationalized that outcome, right? Essentially, that there was an outcome that occurred, and Bitcoiners want to be enthusiastic about Bitcoin. We want to continue to be optimistic about the project. So maybe we just convinced ourselves that was the correct outcome, and then we kind of applied and we derived some new theories from that experience that weren't necessarily true, right? So I guess I'm talking a lot here, but I'm saying that there's an interplay here that has always fascinated me between the actual technology. There's like a piece of code that people run, and then there's sort of the social ideology that we've grafted on top of Bitcoin, which is this idea that we have, like, that Bitcoin is sound money, or that it is, you have a right to your keys, and that those property rights are absolute or higher than other cryptocurrencies, right? So in a scenario where those property rights are eroded, I guess, what do you think happens to sort of the Bitcoin theory? Would we change how we think about Bitcoin? Would we have to, in your view? Obviously, you're trying to avoid that, but I do find it a theoretically interesting question.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I think Bitcoin has always been anti-fragile, and a big part of that is the community and the developers behind it. Uh, Anything of sufficient value, people will go to extraordinary measures to uh, address any sort of limitations, right? Like, for example, the block size wars is a good one because Bitcoin has this limitation, and uh, what essentially happened was uh, there are a number of limitations actually with Bitcoin, and the way that we address that is through layer development. And layer development, in particular, of like Lightning and maybe asset protocols like Taproot Assets and RGB, they essentially add new functionality to Bitcoin without changing the base layer. And that essentially makes it so that the base layer can remain a stable foundation for development to occur, which has been very helpful. And that said, it also kind of underscores the fact that Bitcoin does sometimes need to change, especially if it's to address security flaws. And that's where BIP360 falls into. It's not necessarily like a new opcode or a like new functionality improvement. It's to improve Bitcoin's security, and I think that should take precedence over any other activity, to be honest. But that said, I know that it's also very much newer and not ready. And so that said, I hope to have that uh, addressed by the end of the year, and that's kind of my own milestone.
So just to read another paragraph from Jameson here, he's talking about the particular properties that he sees in play in quantum recovery. He talks about censorship resistance, right? The idea that no one should have the power to prevent you from using your keys. This idea of forward compatibility, right? That you won't, the changing the rules won't impact valid transactions. Conservatism. The people shouldn't be expected to be, highly responsive. Obviously, an issue like a Q day, having to make some sort of emergency kind of transition there. So do you agree, I guess, with those? So it sounds like you're really worried about those principles being lost and in this situation if we don't take preparation.
Correct. It would be much better to be proactive. There is one potential outcome. So it's kind of worth bringing up the Ethereum plan for addressing this issue, and in particular, their approach is a little bit more hands off in that uh, it relies on BIP32 wallets having secrets kind of held behind hashes that are quantum resistant, that then are committed to via ZK Starks. And so using Stark proofs, that would be a huge change to Ethereum. And it would also disable, in order for it to work, they would need to disable spending uh, ethers in a way that is uh more like, some might say older, but it just anything that didn't use any keys, any addresses that didn't have a seed phrase used to generate them would essentially be broken. They would like be essentially confiscated. And that would break a lot of contracts out there, like smart contracts, and it would also break a lot of use cases out there, and of course, kind of confiscate funds from older wallets, mine included, because I got into Ethereum back in 2017, and then after reading the Bitcoin Standard, I just decided, which was in 2021, I decided that I wouldn't spend my time working on anything other than Bitcoin. But that said, it's worth kind of seeing what they do, and that struck me as kind of a heavy-handed approach, especially if we were to like think of doing it in Bitcoin in a similar way. It would, it would be nice to some degree because a lot of ordinary people would not need to do anything to to like protect their funds. But that said, it would probably break a lot of things in the Bitcoin ecosystem if we were to disable ordinary spends from just a private key. Like if we were to adopt this sort of Stark proof proving mechanism using BIP32 secrets. And so um, that would also, I think, just I mean, although it seems nice and it might be uh, decently plausible, and it might actually be the play. Who knows? I It's just like BIP360 doesn't want like seek to solve it in that manner, because in my opinion, I think it's just the Ethereum approach was just way too heavy-handed. They also required a soft fork, or no, a hard fork, I mean, which they're used to doing, and they're used to altering their monetary properties, and I just don't think I want to see that on Bitcoin. And that's just my own personal opinion as a developer and I guess bit author.
Yeah, you mentioned Safety and Moose, and I've talked to him a little bit about this because I find that I'm always fascinated by this idea again that the ideology and the technology kind of exist, and it's kind of it's unclear where the equilibrium is between them, right? Does if one adjusts, does the other adjust, and which one is kind of the thing that is the driving force? Because you mentioned Ethereum as well, right? So Bitcoin, it's almost like does the ideology determine what's in the code, or does the code determine the ideology, and actually which one is kind of the foremost driver, right? With Ethereum, I think they're very kind of technology first, and some of their ideology comes from wanting to be technologically forward. And Bitcoin, it almost seems backwards, right? We want Bitcoin to have certain properties, right? One of these, including, as Safety describes it, we want it to be this kind of central bank in cyberspace that does provide these unbreakable property rights. But there is this, I think, the meta issue here that is a little bit odd for people who are coming to the space. Is just that this idea that the actions of developers within a cryptocurrency can have implications for the property rights of users, and that's just such a fascinating, like, new concept, because I think that
It's actually an old concept. It has a name. It's called Conway's Law, and it essentially boils down to the fact that uh, technology is a reflection on the culture of those developing it.
and so maybe you can elaborate a little bit on how would you apply Conway's law to Bitcoin or Ethereum as well.
Yeah, well, I mean, two very different perspectives, philosophies, and cultures. So one of the big convincing reasons for me for coming to Bitcoin and not working on anything else is because I came to realize that we can add any functionality we think is good enough to come to Bitcoin uh, using layers. And so obviously like new opcodes might help to some degree, but generally speaking, I'm in favor of ossification just because uh, it's a $1 to $2 trillion asset class, and I don't want to introduce any change that could compromise that. I'd only want to upgrade its security and make it even more protected for high value investors and for long term growth.
Well, I think one of the things that I've always described, I wrote an article for Forbes about this, where I tried to describe why I thought cryptocurrency property rights were weaker than Bitcoin's. And what I've kind of described, and I'm curious your thoughts on, is the idea that within the alternative cryptocurrency world, there's a lot of majoritarianism, especially you get this in the hard forks, where it's, essentially some group can decide to disenfranchise another group, right? Where, so in the instance of a hard fork, right, the Ethereum developers wanted to hard fork and make a technical change, and anyone who didn't go along with that technical change was sort of kicked off of the blockchain, and they were essentially given a separate money, right? They were sort of like given a happy meal and sent on their way, right? They were given given a doggy bag, and they weren't allowed on the Ethereum chain anymore. And sort of how I tried to describe that was that essentially cryptocurrencies have this kind of a similar property right systems as you would expect in a legal system, right? There's some system or group or people that you have to appeal to. Maybe that's not a legal system, maybe that's not a court system, but there's some kind of group of people, and if you find yourself outside of the majority, you find yourself with a new currency. As essentially, we don't have that in Bitcoin, but it does almost strike me that with some of these quantum threats, you could end up in situations where the developers in Bitcoin could face some sort of majoritarian type decision, right? Where essentially there is a Q-day attack, and how do you make a determination of how to move forward if somebody is dissenting, right? I tried to kind of make this argument that in Bitcoin, one of the nice properties we have right now is that the right to dissent, right? You can essentially, and there's a famous old Bitcoin developer well, not developer, but Bitcoin wild man, maybe, who I refer to in this. His name was Moshe Popescu, but he was sort of the ultimate dissenter, right? He didn't run any of the code updates that the Bitcoin core developers wanted to run. He sort of maintained his own compatible client with the Satoshi code, and essentially, he dissented. He was saying, I don't want anything to do with kind of these technologies upgrades. I don't want to deal with you developers. You developers are an attack on Bitcoin. And so I'm going to kind of create my own, compatible version and soldier on. And so I guess with these scenarios where Bitcoin developers could sort of make some sort of decision. I guess how do you think about that? Do you end up in a situation where potentially, if we don't upgrade to something like quantum resistant cryptography, Bitcoin almost could become similar to other cryptocurrencies? Maybe we would lose some of these properties.
Yeah, well, I mean, there was also a series of articles by Thomas Strolight on the problem with Ethereum and how they broke their social contract with miners repeatedly, many times, using essentially a bomb-based monetary policy, the difficulty bomb.
Well, I don't. I would disagree with Tomer a little bit because I think the Ethereum community was always openly disdainful of their mining ecosystem, and that was part of the inherent initial social contract was that they wanted to get rid of them and move to proof of stake. Yeah, do go on, yeah.
Fair enough. And in some ways, there are some Bitcoiners who aren't necessarily as appreciative of miners as they could be. I think Bitcoin does have a unique culture in that we appreciate the roles that miners play in securing the network and the fact that they should be rewarded. And Hourglass, the Hourglass proposal is one ways they could be rewarded by sort of Q day, in that competing transactions would be bid up, and there would be hopefully a windfall for miners from Satoshi's coins. Everything I do, I always look through the lens of incentive compatibility with miners, because like they're like largely a source of truth on the network, although there is of course the user activated soft fork or the user rejected soft fork, right? And so which are although are interesting and necessary thought experiments. And the problem is that we've never actually seen a user activated soft fork. Even SegWit was activated via massive, and
Well, that's a
so
very debatable part of the Bitcoin theory, but yeah, I agree. I agree with you. Yeah, I would agree that we've never seen one actually deployed.
right, even such a scenario could result in a split of the network and a compromise in economic security. And so that any soft fork has to be evaluated and rolled out in a way that is cognizant of these risks, right? Like every soft fork is a potential risk to the network.
Right. I call that Mersh's paradox, which is essentially the idea that any proposed upgrade to Bitcoin is indistinguishable from an attack, which I think was one of his like nice kind of observations. But okay, so let's get we talked about some of the theory and some of why you would want to kind of be proactive about this, because we don't want to talk about this theoretical problems, that rabbit holes that just are endless. Let's talk about the development process now, right? Obviously, as you mentioned, the development process around Bitcoin is protracted. There is this kind of push towards ossification. There has been a tremendous slowdown of upgrades over time. Jeremy Rubin recently pointing out that it's been 4+ years since Taproot. How does BIP 360 go about getting support, and are you confident? Are you ready to shepherd the BIP through this process, which could be arduous and maybe years long, as we've seen in the case of BIP 119?
Yeah, Jeremy Rubin's work on Object Template Verify and BIP119 and Sapio, if you remember that, and all his plebfi talks and outreach and writing. He wrote some beautiful pieces for Advent of Bitcoin back in, I think, in 2021, was it? And uh, yeah, I mean, like he did all the work and then some. And he's been doing that work since I think 2017. I think that was when Bitcoin, maybe 2019. I don't know, but
I think the proposal was at the top of 2018, where he formally introduced, and then wrote the blog post where he said he was going to launch the dual activation and rejection.
right, okay. And so yeah, that was that was 7 years ago. And so am I prepared to stick with this soft fork and advocate for it for 7 years plus? I think so. It's like, I mean, in one way that's like some people would kill for that level of job security, right?
Fair enough. Yeah.
But that said, there might be some exogenous factors that could accelerate uh, the impetus behind that soft fork, in that it's not just a feature improvement. It is a security upgrade. That said, I would also say that check template verify implementing covenants does also improve Bitcoin security to some degree as well. In that there might be some applications for vaults and
But it
other.
sounds like your appeal here is essentially this is a different class of software. You're sort of essentially saying like we've had we've delayed features, but this is a security, and because it relates to security, we shouldn't delay, and that's why we should act.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
And you feel like that appeal is good enough and will be understood by the development community.
Well, the developers, in some ways, have been less receptive to my work than plebs have been. Just like ordinary people who come up to me and said, "I'm very grateful for you taking this problem very seriously because it's a source of FUD that has been around for a while, and there's maybe a kernel of truth to it. It could be, a big limiting factor for Bitcoin, and also a potential existential threat." And so there's a lot of people worried about this. But that said, a lot of the developers I've come across in Bitcoin Core and just in the community kind of they just underplay the concern, as they always have done, even since early Bitcoin talk posts about it in 2013. And so, like, this has been a long-standing specter over
Well, I
Bitcoin.
think the reason for that is, some of it back in the day, right? Like Vitalik Buterin before Ethereum famously was seeking to raise money for sort of a quantum resistant mining company or a quantum powered mining company. So there is sort of this idea that quantum computing has been one of this, perennial issues that, in the same way, I was talking to a reporter recently where, talking about sort of, the I guess sex or gender makeup of different conferences, right? There are certain problems or certain observations of the community that just don't change over time. They're as true today as they were in 2014. So yeah, I think in a lot of ways the community has this perspective of quantum computing, that it's essentially this kind of boogeyman that is never really going to materialize into something that they have to actually consider or act on.
It's hard to know. It really is hard to know when the proper time to address this is. It's hard to like. Additionally, it's hard to stomach BIP 360 because it isn't perfect.
What don't you like about what like I mean, what do you think the areas of improvement are for Bit 360?
Well, it's kind of a step. I was about to say it was kind of a stepping stone towards uh, more sophisticated improvements. One of those would be BitZip, which is what I'm calling a proposal by Ethan Heilman, who is also, by the way, generously offered to be co-author of my BIP. Yeah, and on the mailing list a couple weeks ago, he presented an idea for a sort of cross transaction, block wide transaction compression, essentially, algorithm that would then be able to increase Bitcoin's throughput by at least an order of magnitude, which is very cool. And also, it's specifically for post-quantum cryptography, and it employs uh, signature aggregation along with Stark proofs to be assembled by miners. This isn't like a Stark's opcode. This isn't like anything like that, like a ZK opcode. It's more like on a block wide level, transactions would be compressed and then could be committed to in the block. And so I think that would be really good to focus on after BIP360 has an activation client, because that addresses one of the concerns around BIP 360. And I think it'll be a way to mature it by like kind of like extending it. And also, hopefully, by then, more eyes will be on it. And maybe we will be able to come up with solutions to the BIP32 XPub problem. XPubs being like how you generate additional public keys for wallets, for watch only wallets, or even multi-sig wallets, right? Like the XPub is crucial for that, and for like the problem is like the post cryptography algorithms that we're working with right now, it's just not quite clear how to do that. And that said, uh SecP 256K1, uh it was always it was always understood that it was possible to implement Schnorr signatures, but it was never actually done in a real way until Peter Wille and his co-contributors actually went out of their way to implement and really just do a deep dive into the algorithm. And I think similar things will need to happen for post-quantum cryptography. Ideally, Sphinx would get a lot of love, which is SLH DSA. It's hash based, so it's considered to be relatively conservative from a post-quantum cryptography standpoint, and also um, if we can maybe adjust the hash algorithm slightly, we might be able to make it more not only signature aggregatable, but also improve the speed at which it can be verified. And so there's a there's there's a number of different like improvements and rough edges and just things that like I want a BIP 360 that will come as it matures. It hasn't even really been a year yet, so it's been more like six months, and we've done a ton of work so far. As with anything in software, like no software is perfect, and unfortunately, with cryptography, you needed to be as close to perfect as possible. And so, one of those things I'm looking to potentially do is maybe to like formally verify portions of libpic a library that I've developed called libbitcoin which includes the three signature algorithms that are defined in BIP360 and kind of could serve as a staging ground for additional development in that regard. Um, and so, bringing it back around to BitZip is being a post cryptography oriented block wide cross transaction signature aggregation protocol. Um, it would essentially be a good way to tie all that work together, and then also address the concern that because quantum signatures are larger, because quantum public post quantum cryptography public keys and signatures are larger, it does actually reduce to some degree how many transactions can be included in a block, and so that reduces Bitcoin's throughput. And uh, one way to handle this is with this transaction compression, and that should appeal to even people who are supportive of like to some might call them big blockers, right? Like wanting there to be more transactions in a block and then compress those fees and give them to miners. So there's a number of possibilities that I'm really bullish on for BIP 360, and we're working hard. So yeah.
Well, there's always work to be done on Bitcoin. Hunter B, senior protocol engineer for the Enduro sidechain product and author of the BIP 360 proposal. How can people support your work? Where can I find out more about what you're working on?
Yeah, so first you can go to bip360.org and take a look at the BIP. And then also there's surmount.systems where accept donations by Bull 12 and silent payments. I don't like to reuse addresses, obviously. And also
But now we know why.
yeah, and also you can follow Surmount Systems on X. Although I love Nostr, every Nostr identity is a public key, and so that's not something I trust for this kind of thing as well. And hopefully someday there's a NIP that addresses this, and so in a satisfactory way. I think I talked to Will Casarin about this, by the way, and he um, uh, had some interesting insights and feedback. Hopefully he can kind of move that Nostra along. But yeah, so those are kind of the touch points. And then on X, I'm also you can follow me at CryptoQuick.
Well, appreciate the time and the insights. Of course, we'll be bringing development conversations to Brooklyn, New York this June the 24th to the 26th. Permissionless, the largest cryptocurrency developer conference. I'll be there bringing a Bitcoin perspective, as well as some special guests and folks talking about this and other issues pressing on the Bitcoin development conversation today. Soft forks, layer twos, different meta protocols that are coming, changing Bitcoin, might change Bitcoin, or in some cases won't change Bitcoin. That'll be the discussion there. This has been Supply Shock, a Blockworks podcast. Thanks for listening.